Hi, this is Patricia Stepler, and I want to welcome you to your Inside Power, where we're discovering the powers that we have inside of us that can change our lives. Today's episode is called Life is a Mind Game. And life really is a mind game because, it's the power of our minds that control us, or we are controlled by the outside world. So success or failure, it's the same thing. Either you've caused the success or you've caused the failure. It's all between the 6 inches of our mind. So my question to you then is, do you have the power to control your life? You see, you either control your life or it controls you. And then by it, I mean the outside world. You see, and when we allow the outside world to control us, then we tend to blame others or blame a circumstance. And we live in that victim mentality. But you know what? We are not a victim. We are in control. But if we don't take control of our lives, and if we don't take control of our thinking, then we have allowed ourselves to be a victim and to be really tossed around by the world. And we become like the plaything for the world. I remember when I was in middle school, or junior high, as we called it, I had a teacher, a history teacher, and she believed that the world was controlled and we were just like puppets. Well, that's if you believe that the outside world's controlling you. But you see, when you believe that you're in control, you're no longer a puppet at all. You are connected to source energy or a higher power, infinite attention, infinite intelligence, or God, whatever you want to call it. So which do you want to be? Do you want to be connected to a higher power? Or do you want to be like a puppet and be controlled by the world tossing you around? And I think when you think about, we know the answer is you want to be in control. Because you see, when you're in control, then you have the ability to create the world that you want and live the lifestyle that you choose. Now, some of you might be thinking, well, the lifestyle I have right now is not really what I chose. And I would say, yes, it is. One time I wouldn't have believed it either. So if you're having a hard time believing that, I get it. Because I've done extensive study in the last few years to try to understand, why is it that some people seem to have everything just kind of fall in their laps and everything just goes terrific for them. And other people just seem to work so hard and nothing ever seems to go right. But it all starts right up here in your mind. It's all in your thinking. It's all in your thought process. Now, keep this in mind. Scientists estimate that 10,000 to up to 60,000. I've heard 10,000, I've heard 60,000. So I'll say between 10 and 60,000 thoughts go through your mind every single day. Now, you do not consciously think of those thoughts, but you see, the mind never stops. The mind never stops thinking. So that's why, even as you've listened to this first 3 minutes of this show, I might have said something and it triggered a thought in you. And so while I was speaking, your mind went off on that thought tangent. And this happens when you read a book. I'm sure it's not just me. You get to the end of the paragraph and you think, I have no idea what I just read. Your eyes were moving across each word. You might have even been saying the words in your head, but you have no clue of what you read, because you see something triggered a thought and off you went on a tangent and you were no longer comprehending what was in the book. And we do this all day long. That's why you can, two people can hear the same thing and sometimes hear something different because somebody maybe had a thought tangent that took them in a different direction, or maybe that thought led them to a deeper understanding. And so even though they heard the same thing, they didn't hear the same thing. So, wow, that's kind of heavy, isn't it? So what I want you to realize is that these thought patterns also impact how you're feeling. So have you ever gotten up in the morning and you're just having a fabulous day and you just feel so good? Well, when that happens, the predominant thought patterns going around in your mind, even while you're sleeping, because the mind never stops, they were, happy thoughts. They were positive thoughts. But if you ever wake up in the morning and maybe you're not feeling so great, and then the first thing you know, you run your toe into a piece of furniture and now your toe's hurting, and now it's even a worse day. And you just say to yourself, yeah, this day's just going to be one of those bad days. Everything's going to go wrong. Well, then you can pretty much count on the fact that those 10,000, 60,000 thoughts going around in your mind have been in the negative side. So how does this control us? Well, first of all, we need to have those differences, because if you don't know what it feels like when you're feeling really good, well, then how do you know when you're feeling really bad? So we have to have that up and down cycle. It has to be there. It's kind of like a roller coaster. But when you're feeling low, how long does it take for you to get back up to feeling good? And so that's what I want you to be conscious of during this next week. I want you to really think about how you're feeling. And when you're not feeling good, what can you do to change it around? For me, sometimes it's a piece of music, an uplifting piece of music, or maybe I'll do some meditation. Or as I was just sharing with somebody else, sometimes maybe reading a good chapter in a book, but that might be the last thing you want to do, right? Any of those things, because sometimes we're feeling so bad that we don't want to feel better. And it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But those are times you really have to fight through it. Because you see, as long as you're on that downward spiral or that negative feeling, you're not going to have the successes that you want in life. So we have to learn that circumstances can be very strong and powerful, and they can cause us to have defeat. So if we don't want to live by those circumstances that we don't want, we have to choose different choices. So when you believe you're in control, then see, you can climb higher, because you're going to understand how to move to that next level. So you have the choice to allow circumstances outside of you to control your life, or you can choose to control your life. And that really is your choice. So I want you to realize that this world is full of wonderful possibilities. And they're really endless. And so what I want you to do is to start thinking about what you really want to do, and then allow yourself to be open enough to the possibilities. You see, it does you no good to have a really big goal, something that you really want to have in life, and then when an opportunity arises, you shut it down. And then another opportunity arises and you shut it down. Well, pretty soon you're going to stop getting those opportunities. So you have to learn to say yes. Now, it doesn't mean to say yes to everything, because not every opportunity is going to move you towards your goal. But let me give you an example. So one of the programs that I'm in had 2 days of training. And I really wanted to do that training. It was all online, so it wasn't like I had to go someplace, So it was all online. But you see, I've been given the opportunity to do something bigger than that training. And so I had to make a decision, because things were coming at me, and I had to choose which thing was going to serve me more. The training certainly would serve me, and I realized I could listen to it later. But the other opportunities, if I put them off, it was going to put off the very thing that I was working towards. Now, that's just a small thing, and that was not a real difficult decision. But my point is, sometimes we have to look, we can't do everything. Okay, so I had two opportunities at the same time, and we can't do everything when they're, at the same time. So then you have to make a choice. Well, which one is going to get you towards your goal? Now, in the case I was doing, both of them would get me towards my goal, but which one was more important for me to do right that moment? So, but we have to avail ourselves to those opportunities. If we don't make sure we're available for those opportunities, then we just pass things by. And like I said, pretty soon his chances will start drying up. So I want you to realize that your spiritual DNA, you see, we are three people simultaneously. We have a body, and inside our body is a mind and a brain that thinks, an intellect. And then we also have a spirit. Now, when that spirit came into your body, the DNA in that spirit was perfect. Your spiritual DNA is perfect, but it doesn't stay perfect because it gets programmed. Just like a computer is programmed and certain software will work on it, it's programmed to and designed to work a certain way. Your mind becomes programmed. And some of it is generationally programmed, meaning it's almost embedded in there from centuries sometimes before. And so once that spirit gets some of that programming, it becomes flawed. Just like when a computer gets a virus and it becomes flawed. So that programming is like having that virus in a computer, and it can set off all kinds of different reactions. And it was so funny because I was on a call just the night before, and these people were talking about this one lady, her goal was to get rid of some of that generational programming. And I thought, what a great goal. Because you can stop that thought patterns. You see, that generational programming gives you habits or gives you thoughts that are not going to serve you well. And so the only way is to change those thoughts and to reverse them. Now, I know for my children, I did some things like that too, and I didn't even realize what I was doing at the time. But I remember my parents, and they were wonderful parents, but I remember my mom telling me one time that I wanted to be a dancer. And I was allowed to take music lessons. And, I got private piano lessons, and eventually I got private voice lessons and learned to play the organ, had some flute lessons for a while. So that was all okay. But I also wanted to be a dancer because, you see, I wanted to be on stage and to sing and to perform. And I knew I needed to know how to dance. And my mom just thought that was a waste of money. She didn't understand what my goals were. And so she never would allow me to take dance lessons. So what happened when I had kids? Yes, they had dance lessons. And I wanted them to experience what I could not. And so not only did they take lessons, but for a while, I took lessons as an adult. And one time I got to do a dance. We did a mother-daughter dance. And it was so much fun. And, when my mom came to the dance recital to see my daughters perform and saw me on stage performing, she felt really bad because it was at that point that she realized what she had denied me all my life. And then she offered to pay for my dance lessons. I'm like, nah. So, that's what happens. I had to change that programming. And what does my granddaughter do? She dances. And she loves it. And it's so natural for her. So that's a very small example of how you start to change a habitual thought pattern, because I'm sure her mother instilled that in her, that dancing was maybe even at that time inappropriate. And maybe that's where that whole thing came, because, I was watching this TV series, and it's really funny because the setting is back in the 1800s, and the performers, like the opera singers and the dancers, they are considered a little less lowly than the people they're performing for. Can you imagine it? I mean, today entertainers just make so much money, and yet back in the early 1800s, they were considered less of a person. That those people in the highfalutin society, let's say, they were just not worthy of their attention, except to entertain them. So here's what I want you to understand. When you see somebody that's super successful and you see somebody that's really struggling, the same laws are working for both of them. I want to read you a quote by Raymond Hollowell. And he says, if all conditions are the result of our actions, and all of our actions are the outcome or the fault of our ideas, then our ideas must determine the conditions in our daily lives. Now let's break that down for a minute. If all conditions are the result of our actions, so every condition that we have is a result of some action we took. Now, some of us may not believe this. And again, it took me a while to believe it too. So if you're struggling with that, I understand, but stay with me. So if all conditions are the result of our actions, so action, reaction, remember you learned that in science class? Every action has a reaction. So every action makes a condition. And all of our actions are the outcome or the fruit of our ideas. So we don't do an action until we've thought about it. So what happens is in our mind, our conscious mind is where ideas come from. But the conscious mind does not move you into action. The subconscious mind moves us into action. So as long as that idea is just spinning up there, it's just a nice, pleasant thought, or maybe not a nice, pleasant thought, but it doesn't do anything. We don't do anything because of it. But once that idea becomes so embedded in who we are, and listen to this, and it's in harmony with our habitual thought patterns, that's when we'll move into action. Now that's really key, because you see, inside our subconscious mind is where our habits lie. And when you get an idea, even if it's something you really, really, really want to do, if it's not in harmony with your habitual thought patterns, you will not do it. You won't go into action. And that's what causes that knowing doing gap. We know what to do because consciously we know exactly what we need to do, but it's hitting a habitual pattern of thought. And because it's hitting that habitual pattern of thought that's not in harmony with what we want to do, we do not go into action. So let's get back to my statement here. So if all conditions are the result of our actions, and all of our actions are the outcome of the fruit or ideas, then our ideas must determine the condition in our daily lives. So if you go backwards, the ideas we have cause our conditions. And remember, our conditions, we only go into action when that idea really hits. So thinking about that, you see, ideas are just like an invention. If you have an inventor who is creating or trying to create a new product, they get the idea first in their mind. And they think about it for a while. So it's spinning around in there and they get so obsessed with it. Maybe they're trying to solve a problem for society or even solve a problem for themselves that they know will benefit others. Isn't that why most people invent something? They see a problem and they want to figure out a solution for that problem. So they get this idea, it's floating around in their head, and they become obsessed by it. So it starts to become embedded into their subconscious. Now, maybe they have this idea in their subconscious that they're not an inventor and they can't produce anything. As long if that's what's happening, that idea just stays there. I had a friend one time tell me that he had actually thought of this product that eventually came to market, but it wasn't he that produced the product because, he never really finished it. He had the idea, but never did anything with it. I remember listening to Napoleon Hill, who wrote Think and Grow Rich. And if you don't know who he is, please look him up. But I remember listening to a tape that he had done, a speech that he had given that was recorded, let's say. And he was talking about giving this talk. And at the end of the talk, this gentleman came up with a whole pile of papers. And he said, you know what? I had all this information right here. And it was pretty much the same thing that Napoleon Hill had been talking about. And he had books that sold millions. And, he said, I had everything here. But you see, he didn't take any action because probably there was something in his subconscious that kept him from moving into action. Whereas Napoleon Hill maybe had that same thought pattern that kept him from moving into action, but he changed it so he could go into action. So back to our inventor. We have an inventor. He's thinking of something in his mind, and then he produces it in reality because now it's in harmony that he can be an inventor. And so he produces a product. That's the same thing you're doing with a thought. You get a thought in your mind, and when it becomes so impressed and so much a burning desire, as Napoleon Hill says, when it becomes a burning desire, then it's in harmony. You've built a new idea and now it's in harmony, and you go through and you go into action. But if it's not in harmony, you won't go into action, even when it's what you want to do, which is where the frustration comes in. So every idea is a mental picture produces that kind, whether the picture is good or bad. So let's say, and I hear people say things all the time. Remember, we talked about this 10 to 60,000 thoughts, good or bad. So I hear people saying things like, I don't have enough money, or I struggle to do this, or my bank account's empty, or I just can't lose weight. Every time I lose weight, it comes right back. You hear people saying things like that. Well, when you repeat a thought over and over, it becomes embedded. So if you say you're struggling with something, you are telling the world, the universe, the higher power, the infinite intelligence, God, whatever you want to call it, you are telling it that's what you want. You see how we can inadvertently say something and it can become embedded? The words you say, the thoughts you think are so important because they produce the outcomes that you have in life. So it's so important, the words you say. I am so grateful that I learned that early on in my life. So when I was in my 20s, I started studying personal development. Now, I will be the first to admit that I had that knowing, doing gap problem. And I didn't have the success that I expected to have because you know what? It wasn't embedded in me yet. But the one thing I really learned from personal development, and if you learn nothing else, this is so important, is I learned to be careful the words I said, especially to children. There's nothing that breaks my heart more than when I hear a parent or a teacher or any adult putting down a child. Because you see, that goes into their subconscious mind and it becomes so embedded in their self-esteem that it could damage them for life. So I was so glad I learned this information because when my children were young, I was very careful how I spoke to them. Was I perfect? No, I'm sure I was not. but I sure tried to be very careful what I said. And it also helped me because I taught children in school, and I tried to be very careful with what I said to them. Was I perfect there? No. Sometimes out of frustration, you say things you know you should not. And then that's when you have to go back and try to build that self-esteem again. You know, the old saying, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. That is such a lie. Because those words are very powerful. So if you have children, be careful what you say to them, or grandchildren. Be very careful. I'll never forget when my son was, probably about 2. I think my daughters were, well, at least my middle child, my middle daughter, she was always trying to get him in trouble, I think. And I remember one time that he took his sippy cup and it had, I don't know, fruit juice in it or something. And he turned it over and he was shaking it on my white carpet in the living room. And she came to tattle on him. And, you know, it was like he was so small. It wasn't that he was trying to be destructive. And I tried to look at it from his own eyes, you know, and thinking that he probably was just seeing a design he was making on the carpet. And I remember thinking to myself, he's just being creative. And another time he took a black marker to the bathroom and wrote all over the counters and the toilet, and this black marker. And again, he was not trying to be destructive. He was being creative. Now, as a parent, you had 2 choices. You could yell at him for something he did not understand, or you could try to explain to him why we don't do that. You see, the words you say are super, super important. So what I want you to think about is, you know, what kind of words do you say? And some of the things I do when I'm coaching people is to help them to clear out and change their thought patterns, their habitual thought patterns, so that they can be more productive in life. And so that's what I do. I do mindset coaching because, you see, if you can clear out your mind and you can get your thoughts to shift around the way they should be, you can do anything you want in life. You can be, you can have, you can do whatever once you get your mindset right. And yet so many people think, oh no, I have to have money to put towards Facebook ads, you know, if you're in business, or I have to have money to do this, that, and the other thing. When the best investment you will ever make is the investment you make in yourself. Because when you invest in yourself, you can unlock treasures. You know, the cave you fear to enter holds the treasures that you think, that you want. And so, you know, sometimes we get ourselves all confused by thinking we have to do this, that, and the other thing, and we have to buy this or buy that, and that'll make us successful. Best success you can ever do is to invest in yourself. So I would suggest that you reach out to me. I am on Facebook as Patty Stepler. I am on LinkedIn as Patricia Stepler, which I know is a bit confusing, but reach out to me because I think when you change and shift your thinking, it unlocks a whole brand new world, and one that you will love living in. This is Patricia Stepler. This is your Inside Power, where I want you to learn to use the powers that you have inside to absolutely change your life and build the reality that you want.